Let's have a look at comparing fraction sizes. Now, a fraction has a numerator and a denominator. The denominator tells you how many pieces you need to make a whole, or it can tell you about the size of the piece. The numerator simply tells you how many of those pieces you have. Now, it's quite obvious that the larger the number on the top, the more pieces you'll have, and therefore the larger the fraction. But this can be a bit confusing here. The larger the number on the bottom, the smaller the size of the piece, and therefore the smaller the fraction. Now, to illustrate this, I'm just going to show you this diagram. Here we've got one whole, and I'm going to start increasing the number of pieces. So I'm increasing the number on the denominator, and I'm making that number larger and larger. And as you can see, those pieces are starting to get very, very small. So as this number on the bottom gets very large, my pieces get pretty tiny. So looking back here, what I want to do is have a look at these fractions and work out whether these fractions are closest to 0, a half, or 1 whole. Some of them are quite easy, some of them a little bit challenging. So let's look at the first one, 8/9. This is the fraction that has 8 pieces and you need 9 of them to make 1 whole. Therefore we are 1 piece away from making a whole, so we are closest to the whole. And what I'll do is I'll just put a little lightning bolt there to represent a tick in the box. Looking at 1/10, this is a fraction size of tenths, which means we need 10 of them to make a whole. We only have 1 of them, so that means we are very close to having nothing. So we're closest to 0. Let's have a look at 2/5 now. 2/5 is a bit trickier. It's sort of close to a half, but it might be quite close to 0 as well. So let's have a look by pulling up a diagram. Here I have a rectangle that represents a whole, and it's been split into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces of equal size. Now let's colour in 2 of those fifths, and we'll ask ourselves whether 2/5 is close to a half or closer to 0. So what I'll do is I'll dot in roughly where a half should be, and we can see that we're missing here half of a fifth, so we're half of 1/5 away from this middle line, but we're 2/5 away from 0, so we are much closer to a half than we are to 0. So I'll put my little tick in the box for closest to a half. Let's have a look at 2/3 now. Again, it's a tricky one. Here's a diagram of one whole rectangle that's been split up into thirds, and we'll colour in 2 of those to represent 2/3. And what I'll do is I'll mark in roughly where halfway should be. So as you can see, 2/3 is half of a piece over the midway line, but it's 1 whole piece away from a whole. So it's much closer to a half than it is to a whole. So I'll put my little tick in closest to a half. Let's have a look at 11/15 now. Now I don't really want to draw a rectangle for this and chop it up into 15 pieces because it's hard to work with. So I'll just have a go at drawing this one on a number line. And what I'll do is roughly mark in 0 and 15. Now halfway between 0 and 15 is 7.5. And we need to find where 11 sits. So let's put 11 in here. Now 11 is 4 pieces away from 15, but it's only 3.5 pieces away from the middle point. So this means that 11/15 is closer to the middle point at 7.5. Well, I'll place my tick and say that 11/15 is closer to a half by half of a piece. Lastly, let's look at 14 out of 18. Again, I don't really want to draw up a rectangle because it's a bit tricky to split it up into 18 pieces. So I'll start by drawing another line, and let's roughly mark in the important points. 18 and halfway, which is 9. And let's mark in where 14 might be. Now let's work out whether 14 is closer to the middle point or the end point. So 14 is 5 pieces away from 9, or it's 4 pieces away from 18. This means that 14 eighteenths is 4 pieces away from a whole, or 5 pieces away from a half. Because it's closer to the whole, we'll place our lightning bolt in the closer to one whole column.